A man alone in the darkness found himself on the edge of danger, and what saved him was not the kindness of strangers, but a guardian he never expected. The connection that formed in that moment grew into something powerful enough to change an entire community. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe for more moving stories, and share your thoughts in the comments along with your city. Samuel Harris had lived his life in quiet perseverance, learning to navigate a world that often treated him as invisible. He was a black man in his late 50s, blind since his early 20s, and though the loss of sight had stolen so much from him, it had never stolen his dignity. With his cane tapping in rhythm, he moved carefully along the cracked sidewalks of the city, counting steps, memorizing turns, and relying on the kindness of strangers when he had no other choice. Yet kindness was rare in a place where people rushed past one another without noticing who was struggling beside them. On this particular afternoon, the city was especially unforgiving. The honks of impatient cars, the buzz of voices spilling from open cafes, and the hurried footfalls of pedestrians overwhelmed the air. Samuel clutched his cane tighter, tapping with care, listening for clues that would keep him safe. But fate does not always honor caution. His foot caught the edge of a broken slab of concrete, and before he could catch himself, his body pitched forward. His cane flew from his grip, clattering against the pavement. He landed hard, pain shooting up his knees and scraping his palms raw against the rough sidewalk. The sudden fall stole his breath, and in the darkness he had lived with for decades, panic rose like a flood. Around him, people noticed. He could hear the shifting footsteps, a murmur or two, even the faint gasp of someone startled. Yet no one bent to help. He heard the sound of movement circling him, strangers adjusting their paths to step around his fallen figure, as if he were an obstacle instead of a man in need. The indifference cut deeper than the scrape on his skin. And then came the sound that terrified him most, the vibration of engines rumbling too close, the low growl of tires rolling fast. He had fallen near the edge of the curb, and the tremor of a heavy vehicle approached the kind of vibration that sent fear into his chest, because he could not see how close it was. He scrambled, trying to orient himself, but without his cane, direction was a cruel mystery. In that moment, he thought of death. He thought of how easily it could come swift and unnoticed, and how quickly the city would move on. But then, through the chaos, another sound shattered the moment, the sharp, commanding bark of a dog. It rang out with such authority that the world seemed to freeze. Another bark followed, deeper, stronger, filled with urgency. Tires screeched as brakes slammed. Horns blared angrily, drivers yelling out of windows, but the dog did not retreat. Samuel flinched at the sudden silence that fell between the blasts of sound, the kind of silence that carried tension, as if every eye in the street had turned to witness something extraordinary. The dog barked again, and Samuel felt the air shift beside him. Then warmth pressed against his arm, thick fur beneath his fingertips. He stiffened his breath, fearing for a moment that it was a stray ready to bite. But instead of aggression, the animal nudged him gently, sliding something back toward him. His cane, Samuel's fingers closed around it, astonished. The touch of the dog lingered by his side, steady grounding him when the world had felt like it was unraveling. He reached out again, this time slower, brushing against the curve of a muscular shoulder, the rhythm of a steady breath. The dog didn't flinch or pull away. It leaned in closer, pressing itself between him and the open street, as if claiming him as its charge. He could not see the cars stopped at odd angles, drivers gaping from their windows, or the small crowd that had gathered in shock at what they were witnessing. All he knew was the presence beside him, a living shield that had made a choice no human nearby had made to protect him. Samuel's throat tightened. For years he had managed his blindness alone, his pride and his stubbornness keeping him from asking too much of others. Yet now, in his most vulnerable moment, a creature he had never met had offered the one thing he had been denied all day: compassion. He whispered a hoarse "thank you," his voice cracking, though he doubted the dog could understand the words. But in the way the German Shepherd stayed planted at his side, ears alert, chest heaving from exertion, Samuel believed the message had been understood. In that instant, a bond was born not through choice, but through necessity, sealed in the seconds between life and death. Samuel remained kneeling on the cold sidewalk, his scraped hands stinging while his mind fought to make sense of what had just happened. The roar of the traffic that had nearly taken his life was fading into the background, and in its place was the steady presence of the large German Shepherd pressed firmly at his side. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted for miles, but the heat radiating from the animal grounded him in a way he had never experienced before. His fingers, still trembling, drifted back towards the coarse fur, and he froze. Instinct screamed at him to pull away, to remember that strays could be dangerous, unpredictable, even vicious. All his life he had been warned to be cautious, especially now that he could not see the signs of a threat approaching. But before fear could root itself, the dog made its move. With a careful nudge, firm yet astonishingly gentle, the shepherd pressed Samuel's fallen cane back into his palm. The gesture was so deliberate, so precise, that Samuel felt his throat close. A rush of warmth spread across his chest, not just from relief, but from the shocking realization that this creature seemed to understand him. His lips parted, but no words came out. He had endured countless humiliations in silence, swallowing the pain of being overlooked and ignored. Yet this one act of kindness from an animal left him speechless. Around him, footsteps shuffled as people whispered. Someone muttered in awe. Did that dog just give him his cane? Another voice, skeptical but shaken, said, It can't be real. It must be trained. Samuel could not see the curious faces surrounding him, but he felt their hesitation in the air. The crowd suddenly stilled by something greater than themselves. A moment later, a sharp tug broke the fragile stillness. A woman, perhaps in her 30s, judging by the timbre of her voice, rushed forward, concern painted in her tone. Sir, let me help you up, she said, and her hands reached for his arm. But before she could lift him, a sound erupted from the shepherd, a low, guttural growl that made the hairs on Samuel's neck rise. It wasn't the sound of hostility, but of warning, a protective note that left no doubt in anyone's mind. The dog positioned itself between Samuel and the woman, shoulders squared, ears back, declaring its claim with unwavering certainty. Samuel's heart hammered as confusion collided with an unfamiliar sense of safety. He whispered shakily, Easy boy, it's okay. But the dog did not move away. Its body pressed tighter to his as though drawing a line in the sand. The woman gasped, startled, and withdrew her hands, muttering, It won't let me near you. It's guarding you. The growl softened, replaced by a steady, protective silence, and in that silence, Samuel felt his eyes well with tears. For years he had relied only on himself, his cane, and a memory of independence that grew heavier as he aged. Strangers had passed him on sidewalks countless times without a second glance. He had fallen before left to scramble back up alone while people walked around him, unwilling to pause their busy lives. Yet here was an animal one that had no reason to care, standing between him and the world with the kind of loyalty he had never known, even from some people he had trusted. His useless eyes blurred with tears, but the feeling in his chest was crystal clear. The dog was not just present, it was devoted. He clutched the cane now returned to him, his knuckles white, and reached out his other hand again. The air still buzzed with the whispers of bystanders, some cautious, some awestruck, and Samuel remained on the ground with the shepherd pressed firmly against his side, its loyalty no longer in question. The dog's presence radiated a strange combination of tension and comfort, keeping everyone at bay while silently reassuring Samuel that he was safe. His cane, once a symbol of isolation and independence, was now in his hand again because of this creature, and though Samuel could not see the dog, he could feel its steady breath and the weight of its protective stance. Then from the edges of the crowd, a man's voice cut through. It was deep-aged, carrying the calm authority of someone who had seen too much of the world to be surprised easily. "That's not just a stray," the voice said firmly. The footsteps drew closer, deliberate and unhurried, and the shepherd's body tensed immediately. Samuel felt the shift, the muscles tightening beneath his palm, the low vibration of a growl forming in its chest. He swallowed, uncertain whether to call out, but the man spoke again, his tone softer now, almost reverent. "I know those marks. Look on its ear." He was speaking not just to Samuel, but to the curious onlookers who had gathered. "That tattoo. It's a K9 designation. This dog served, police or military, maybe both. This one's a veteran." The crowd stirred at his words, some gasping, some craning to catch a glimpse of what the man had identified. Samuel, blind to it all, felt a wave of shock that left his lips trembling. A K9. The very idea of it sent chills through him. He reached again for the shepherd's ear, carefully, reverently brushing against the fur until his fingertips touched the rough edge of a scar and the faint indentation where ink had once been burned into skin. The shepherd flinched, pulling away, and the growl deepened sharper, now directed not at Samuel, but at the stranger drawing nearer. "Easy there," the man said, his tone calm but firm, the kind of voice used to soothe in the heat of battle. "I've worked with dogs like this before. I just want to see him." But the shepherd would not have it. It shifted its body until it was practically draped over Samuel, shielding him with every ounce of its strength. Its lips curled, teeth flashing at the encroaching figure, and the warning was clear. Samuel felt his heart pounding, not in fear of the dog, but in fear of what the stranger might provoke. "Please," Samuel said shakily, gripping the shepherd's fur to steady himself. "Don't come too close. He doesn't want it." The man stopped, his boots scuffing against the pavement, and after a long silence, he exhaled heavily. That reaction says everything, he muttered. He's been abandoned. Dogs like him, they give everything in service, and when their bodies start to break, they're discarded like tools. No wonder he doesn't trust me. No wonder he clings to you. The words pierced Samuel like a blade. He thought of his own life, of how often he had felt discarded, treated as invisible because of his blindness and the color of his skin, as if his worth had been reduced to nothing. Now, realizing that the animal beside him carried the same scars of rejection, the same lingering mistrust of a world that had used and abandoned him, Samuel's chest ached with a new kind of kinship. He tightened his grip on the shepherd, whispering softly, "You're safe with me. I won't throw you away." The growl subsided, though the tension remained. The veteran stood a few feet away, respect coloring his voice. "If he's chosen you, then you've got something rare. These dogs, they don't give their loyalty twice. If he's guarding you, it means he sees something in you no one else does. Don't let him go." The crowd began to thin as the moment stretched on. Some people moved by the revelation, others retreating to the rhythm of their own lives. Samuel stayed where he was, grounded by the truth that had just been spoken aloud. He had stumbled blindly into danger, and yet fate had delivered not just a protector, but a soul as battered and weary as his own. He pressed his forehead lightly to the shepherd's fur, ignoring the stares, feeling the warmth and the quiet promise in the animal's presence. The German shepherd did not pull away this time. Samuel remained kneeling on the cracked pavement long after the crowd dispersed, his hands still pressed against the German shepherd's neck, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath fur, scarred by years of service and rejection. The veteran's words echoed in his mind, filling him with both awe and sorrow. This was not just a stray that had happened upon him. This was a discarded soldier, a creature that had given everything in loyalty, only to be abandoned when time and wear left it too slow or too old. Samuel's throat tightened at the thought, because it mirrored his own life in ways that struck too deeply to ignore. He too had given his best years to a world that had often looked past him, judged him for the darkness in his eyes, and left him standing on corners unheard, unseen, unvalued. Now this dog, once a warrior, once essential, was here with him, both of them survivors of neglect. The shepherd trembled under his touch, the low growl fading into a faint whine, and Samuel felt the animal's body shiver, not from the cold, but from memories he could not see. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his voice and whispered, "You're safe with me. No one's going to hurt you again." The words came out raw, pulled from a place in his chest that ached with old wounds, and for the first time, the shepherd shifted its weight and lowered its head until it rested fully across Samuel's lap. Samuel stiffened his heart, clenching at the trust in that gesture, the heavy warmth grounding him as tears slid down his cheeks. He bent forward, pressing his forehead against the dog's ear, and whispered, "I'll take care of you." The shepherd let out a long breath, as if surrendering some part of its burden, and the bond that formed in that silence was not loud or dramatic, but carved deep, a quiet vow between two broken souls. Eventually, Samuel struggled to his feet, with the dog pressed firmly to his side. His knees ached, his palms burned, but the weight of loneliness seemed to have lifted just enough for him to stand straighter. With his cane in one hand and the shepherd's fur beneath the other, he began the slow walk home. Neighbors glanced as he passed, some with surprise, some with suspicion. But Samuel felt their stares less than he ever had before. His attention was consumed by the presence at his side, a living anchor that guided him not with words, but with unwavering steadiness. When he finally reached his small apartment, the shepherd followed him inside, sniffing cautiously at the worn furniture and narrow hallway. Samuel filled a bowl with water and set out what little food he had, but the dog ignored it. Instead, it padded to the front door, circled once, and lay down with a heavy sigh, its body pressed against the threshold, as if guarding the entrance. Samuel tried coaxing it, urging it to eat, but the shepherd refused. As night fell, he settled into his worn chair, listening to the sounds of the city beyond the thin walls. Every so often he heard the faint whimpering from the door, the small broken cries of a creature trapped in dreams it could not escape. The shepherd's paws twitched claws, scratching lightly against the wood, its body jerking as though reliving chases, fights, moments of service that had left scars on its soul. Samuel sat awake, his heart breaking with every sound, and whispered again and again, "You're safe now. No one's sending you away again." The shepherd did not wake, but the tension in its cries seemed to ease when Samuel's voice filled the silence. Hours passed, the city quieted, and Samuel finally dozed in his chair. When morning light slipped through the blinds, he awoke to the steady sound of breathing. Samuel woke to the sound of the city alive outside his apartment walls, the muffled hum of traffic, the distant calls of vendors opening their stalls, and the morning chorus of pigeons gathering in the alley. He had barely slept, his body sore from the night in the chair, but when he tilted his head toward the door, he heard the steady breathing of the shepherd. The dog was still there, stretched out in the same place it had been all night, guarding the threshold with the vigilance of a soldier who had never truly retired from service. Samuel smiled faintly, rubbing his tired eyes, and rose to his feet with the help of his cane. He moved slowly toward the kitchen, filled a bowl with food again, and this time, after much coaxing, the shepherd ate just enough to quiet Samuel's worry. The dog's reluctance to relax told Samuel one thing: it had been starved not only of meals, but of trust, and trust would take time. That morning, Samuel decided it was time to test the bond that had formed. He clipped an old belt into a makeshift leash, attached it to the shepherd's collar, and opened the front door. Sunlight spilled into the hallway, and together they stepped into the day. The city smelled different with the dog beside him. The air seemed less hostile, the sounds less overwhelming, and the spaces less threatening. Samuel tapped his cane lightly, but it was the firm tug of the shepherd's body that guided him now. They walked block by block, Samuel's hand curled in the dog's fur for assurance. He marveled at how the shepherd moved with him, slowing at curbs, waiting at corners, pressing against him when strangers brushed too close. It was as though the training of years past had awakened again, not from command, but from instinct to protect. They reached an intersection where construction had left hazards scattered across the sidewalk. Samuel had no warning when his foot edged toward an open manhole covered only by caution tape he could not see. But the shepherd reacted instantly. With a sharp tug backward strong enough to nearly topple him, the dog yanked Samuel away from the gaping void. Samuel gasped, his chest clenching with terror as he realized how close he had come to falling into darkness. He pressed his free hand to his chest, trembling, whispering, "You saved me again." The shepherd licked his hand and once steadying him in a way no words could. They continued, and Samuel's trust in his companion deepened with every step. He felt less like a blind man fumbling through an uncaring city, and more like someone who walked with dignity, guided not by pity or gadgets, but by loyalty on four legs. Later that day, when his strength waned, Samuel found a bench in a small park. He lowered himself carefully, sighing with relief as he leaned back. The shepherd sat beside him, watchful but calm, its eyes scanning the space with an instinct honed long before Samuel ever knew it. Without warning, the shepherd moved closer and lowered its head onto his knee. The weight of it startled Samuel at first, but then warmth rushed through him, a gesture so intimate and gentle that it nearly broke him. His throat tightened, and he stroked the dog's ear, murmuring, "I don't deserve you, but thank you for choosing me." As the moment lingered, footsteps approached. A young boy, no more than 8, stopped a few feet away. Samuel could hear the hesitation in his small breaths, the shifting of sneakers against gravel. The boy's mother whispered behind him, "It's just a dog, don't be afraid." But Samuel sensed the boy's fear as if it was tangible. "You're scared, huh?" Samuel said softly, his voice low and inviting. The boy didn't answer, but his breathing quickened. The shepherd stirred, lifting its head slightly, then surprising everyone by remaining perfectly still. Its body relaxed, its gaze gentle. Slowly, hesitantly, the boy stretched out his hand. Samuel, though blind, guided it with a small gesture, saying, "Go ahead, he won't hurt you." The boy's fingers brushed the shepherd's fur, tentative at first, then firmer as confidence grew. The dog didn't move except to sigh content, allowing the child to discover what Samuel already knew. Its gentleness was as deep as its strength. The boy gasped softly, whispering, "He's not scary." His mother laughed quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "See, not scary at all." Samuel smiled faintly, lifting his face toward the sound. "He's more than not scary," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "He's brave, he's kind." The days that followed their first walk together only deepened the bond between Samuel and the shepherd. And each morning, Samuel woke with a renewed sense of purpose, because he knew he was no longer stepping into the world alone. The dog had given him confidence that his cane alone never could, because where the cane detected obstacles, the shepherd anticipated them adjusting with an intuition that startled Samuel again and again. On one warm afternoon, Samuel made his way through a familiar intersection he had crossed countless times before. He tapped his cane and stepped forward when the light turned, but before he could plant his next foot on the pavement, the shepherd lunged sideways with sudden force, its body slamming against his legs to shove him back onto the curb. Samuel cried out in surprise, thinking at first the dog had panicked, but then the rush of wind brushed his cheek, and the whoosh of spinning tires cut through the air. A bicycle had blasted through the red light, missing him by inches. His knees buckled, his chest throbbed with the terror of what nearly happened, and he dropped his cane in shock. The shepherd pressed tightly against his legs, its growl sharp and guttural, its stance braced as if ready to take on the offender. Samuel bent down, clutching the thick fur, his voice shaking. "You saw it before I even knew." People at the corner gasped, their murmurs carrying a mix of fear and admiration, and one voice cut through the noise, a deep and authoritative tone belonging to a man who had witnessed it all. "That's a K9 response," the voice said with certainty. Samuel turned his head toward the sound as footsteps approached. The shepherd stiffened again, lowering itself into a stance Samuel had come to recognize as protective, its body angled to shield him. The man stopped a few feet away, and Samuel could feel the careful respect in his silence before he spoke again, quieter now, almost as if speaking to himself. "Stop, wait, observe. He's doing the drills. He was trained once long ago." Samuel frowned in confusion, his hand stroking the shepherd's back to soothe its trembling. The man exhaled, then said more firmly, "Sir, forgive me, I'm a police officer. I've worked with dogs like him." That maneuver he just did wasn't instinct. It was training. Someone drilled that into him years ago, and it doesn't go away. Samuel froze, the words settling heavily into his heart. The veteran's earlier observation about the tattoo now felt undeniably true. This shepherd had once served, had once lived under commands, routines, and duties that required sacrifice. Samuel whispered softly, "He saved me again." The officer did not laugh or dismiss the weight of those words. Instead, Samuel heard the faint rustle of fabric, and though he could not see it, the man raised his hand in a salute. "You did good, soldier," the officer said, his voice carrying the weight of reverence. The shepherd did not bark or growl. It only stood straighter, its ears flicking as if it recognized the respect being given. Samuel felt his throat close as emotions tangled within him: gratitude, sorrow, admiration, and something deeper, pride. Pride not only in the dog, but in himself for being the one the shepherd had chosen to protect in this new chapter of its life. The officer lingered for a moment, then added, "Whatever this dog's past, it's not just a past. It's a gift for you now. Don't take it for granted. He knows what he's doing." Samuel nodded faintly, his hand resting on the shepherd's head, whispering, "I never will." The officer's footsteps retreated, swallowed by the hum of the city, leaving Samuel and the dog once again alone on the corner. He crouched low, holding the shepherd's face between his hands, his blind eyes glistening. "You're not broken," he whispered fiercely. "You're extraordinary. They might have thrown you away, but you still matter." The bond between Samuel and the shepherd grew stronger with each passing day, and though the city remained unpredictable and often cruel, Samuel walked its streets with a steadiness he had never known before. The dog's old training had resurfaced in ways that astonished him daily, and each demonstration of loyalty carved deeper into his heart the truth that this was not just companionship, but salvation. Yet the world had a way of testing bonds, and Samuel's greatest test came one afternoon when he ventured into the underground subway station. The hum of trains rushing in tunnels, the clang of steel against steel, and the echo of hurried footsteps on concrete made the air thick with tension. Samuel gripped his cane tightly, his free hand clutching the shepherd's collar as they descended the crowded stairwell. The shepherd's body pressed close to him, guiding his steps with gentle nudges and firm resistance when danger loomed. But the stairs were slick with rainwater tracked in by commuters, and Samuel's worn shoes betrayed him. His foot slipped on the slick edge, and in an instant gravity seized him, his body lurching forward toward the unforgiving drop. A cry tore from his lips, terror gripping his chest as the world tilted. Yet before he could tumble, the shepherd reacted. With a burst of strength that defied its age, the dog lunged, jaws clamping tightly onto the fabric of Samuel's sleeve. Its teeth dug in not to harm, but to hold its body straining backward with desperate force. Samuel felt the violent jerk as the shepherd pulled against his weight claws, scraping and sliding against the wet stone. The dog's body shuddered under the effort, its paws slipping its own safety at risk, yet it refused to release him. The scene unfolded in a heartbeat, and the crowd around them gasped, frozen by the sight of the man teetering and the dog straining to save him. A woman screamed. A man cursed in shock, and then footsteps thundered as strangers rushed forward. Hands grabbed Samuel's arm and shoulder, dragging him back onto the step, and the shepherd, refusing to yield, pulled with every ounce of muscle until Samuel's body was steady again on the stairwell. Samuel collapsed against the rail. His breath ragged his knees, trembling with the weight of what nearly happened. He reached immediately for the shepherd, his fingers trembling as they buried into its fur, and he whispered hoarsely, "You didn't let me fall. You saved me." The shepherd panted heavily, its chest heaving, but it leaned into him, pressing its body against his knees, as though to reassure him that it was still there, still his shield against the chaos of the world. The people who had gathered around them were silent at first, shaken by the raw devotion they had just witnessed. Some bent to check on Samuel, others reached out in awe toward the shepherd, but the dog's protective stance did not falter. Its body remained between Samuel and the crowd, its head lowered, its eyes fierce and unyielding, daring anyone to harm the man it had just saved. And then, as the silence stretched, it broke not with words, but with tears. A woman nearby sobbed openly, her voice cracking as she whispered that dog risked everything for him. A man nodded, his voice thick. "I've never seen loyalty like that." People wiped their eyes, their hardened city exteriors crumbling in the face of such devotion. In a place where most hurried past suffering without a second glance, this display of selflessness cut through indifference like a blade. Samuel, blind to the scene, but feeling every vibration in the air, pressed his face into the shepherd's neck and wept openly. His tears soaked the dog's fur as he clutched it like a lifeline, his voice shaking. "You're all I have, and you've given me more than anyone else ever did." The shepherd shifted slightly, its panting easing as it leaned against him more fully, a living wall of strength and loyalty. The strangers who had rushed to help stepped back, realizing that what bound man and dog was sacred and unshakable. Some lingered to watch as Samuel gathered himself, others left with heavy hearts, but lighter spirits, carrying with them the image of an aging shepherd, refusing to let go, risking its own safety without hesitation. Samuel rose slowly, his legs unsteady, and continued down the steps with the shepherd pressed tightly at his side. Each step was cautious, deliberate, but there was no fear, now only trust. When they finally reached the platform, Samuel sat on a bench, his body still trembling from the near fall, and the shepherd lay at his feet, its head resting across his shoes. Samuel stroked its fur endlessly, whispering promises into the air. "I will never abandon you." The story of what had happened in the subway did not remain confined to the underground platform, or to the tears of strangers who had witnessed the scene. In a city where news traveled quickly, where stories of cruelty and neglect often filled the air, the account of an aging German shepherd saving a blind black man with such determination spread like fire. By the time Samuel returned home that evening, exhausted and shaken neighbors who had once passed him silently on the sidewalk now stopped to ask if he was all right. They brought small offerings, some food for the shepherd, a few old blankets, even treats wrapped clumsily in paper bags. Samuel had lived in the same building for over a decade and could not remember anyone knocking on his door simply to see if he was okay. But now they did, and it startled him almost as much as it warmed him. He accepted their kindness shyly, his pride warring with gratitude, while the shepherd stood near the door, watchful but calm, as though recognizing the sincerity of the visitors. Day by day, the circle around Samuel began to change. The woman who lived 2 floors above, who had once told her son to avoid the scary blind man, now brought him home-cooked meals. The young man who had mocked Samuel's clumsy steps in the past now offered to carry groceries up the stairs. But none of these gestures moved Samuel more than the quiet encounters between the shepherd and the children of the neighborhood. The dog, once fierce and unapproachable, revealed a gentleness that seemed reserved for the vulnerable. It was during one of these encounters that a small miracle took place. On a bright afternoon, Samuel sat on the stoop outside his building, the shepherd at his feet, while children played in the street. The sound of their laughter reached him light and full of life, and he smiled faintly, stroking the dog's ears. Then he heard a hesitant voice close by. "Mister, can I touch your dog?" Samuel turned his head toward the sound and recognized the cautious tone of a little girl. Her footsteps were slow, her cane tapping lightly on the pavement in front of her. She was blind like him. He felt his heart catch, struck by the realization. He could hear her mother's nervous warning in the background, but the girl was insistent, her voice trembling yet brave. "Please, I just want to try." Samuel hesitated, his hand gripping the shepherd's collar instinctively. This was a dog that had been discarded, scarred by service, haunted by memories that woke it in the night. But before he could decide, the shepherd moved on its own. It rose slowly, its tail lowering its body, softening into a posture Samuel had learned meant peace. The dog stepped toward the girl, stopping just close enough for her small hands to reach. She extended her fingers, fumbling at first, until they brushed against fur. The shepherd remained perfectly still, its breathing slow, its eyes closing, as though understanding the weight of this fragile trust. Samuel's throat burned as he whispered, "Go ahead, sweetheart. He won't hurt you." The girl giggled softly, her hands exploring the shepherd's neck and shoulders. Then astonishingly she asked, "Can I hold the leash?" Just for a minute her mother gasped in protest, but Samuel, hearing the steady calm in the shepherd's stance, nodded slowly. "Yes, just a few steps." He guided her hand to the leash, and the shepherd, as if it had done this 1,000 times before, adjusted its pace to hers. Together they walked 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, the girl's cane forgotten in her free hand as she relied entirely on the shepherd's silent guidance. Around them, the block grew silent. Children stopped playing. Adults leaned out of windows, neighbors gathering in awe. Some pressed hands to their mouths, others wiped at their eyes. When the girl returned, she hugged the shepherd's neck and whispered, "You're brave. You make me brave too." Samuel could not stop the tears that slid down his face as he reached for her shoulder. "He's giving you what he gave me, courage, when I thought I had none left." The girl's mother, now weeping openly, thanked Samuel again and again before leading her daughter away, but the image remained burned into the hearts of everyone present. Word of the moment spread through the neighborhood and beyond. People began to speak of Samuel and his shepherd, not as a sad story of struggle, but as a living testament to hope. The days following the little girl's brave steps with the shepherd were filled with warmth Samuel had never known before, because everywhere he went, people greeted him with kindness, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration for the bond between him and the aging dog that had become the city's quiet miracle. Samuel himself felt lighter, as if the burden of years spent invisible had been lifted by the presence of a loyal friend who gave his life meaning again. But the world rarely allows peace to remain untouched for long. Early one morning, when the sunlight had just begun to filter through the blinds, Samuel stirred from his bed and listened for the familiar sounds that had become his comfort. The rhythmic breathing of the shepherd curled at his feet, the faint shuffle of claws on wood when it shifted positions. But that morning, what he heard instead was silence, broken suddenly by a sharp, uneven gasp. Samuel sat up quickly, his heart lurching, and reached for the shepherd. His hands found the body warm but trembling, the chest rising in shallow, labored breaths. Panic gripped him as he bent lower, calling the dog's name, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, boy. Please stay." The shepherd tried to move, but collapsed again, its legs folding, a whimper escaping its throat. Samuel's world narrowed to terror as he fumbled for the phone, calling the only vet nearby, begging for an appointment. Neighbors heard his cries and rushed to help, one of them driving Samuel and the shepherd to the clinic. The journey was a blur of desperate prayers and whispered reassurances. Samuel's hand never leaving the dog's fur, his voice shaking as he repeated, "You're not leaving me. You hear? You've saved me too many times. Don't stop now." At the clinic, the vet examined the shepherd carefully, his silence heavy, and finally delivered the words Samuel feared. "He's old, and his body shows the strain of years. His heart is weak, and the years of service and neglect before you found him have left scars inside we can't erase. He might not survive. Samuel felt the words like a blow, his knees buckling until he knelt on the cold floor beside the examination table. His hands gripped the shepherd's paw tightly, tears streaming down his face. Memories surged of the moment on the sidewalk when the dog had pressed his cane into his hand of the subway stairs, where it had refused to let him fall of the park bench where it had laid its head on his knee. Each memory was a piece of his salvation, each act a reason he was still alive. No, Samuel whispered fiercely, his voice raw. "You don't get to leave me like this. You saved me. Don't you dare give up now." The shepherd's eyes flickered open at the sound of his voice, cloudy with exhaustion, yet still focused on the man who had given him purpose again. With a monumental effort, the dog moved its tail once against the table, the faint tap enough to tell Samuel that the fight was not over. Samuel broke down, then his forehead pressed against the dog's chest, his sobs shaking his body. He spoke to it as he never had to anyone, words torn from the deepest part of his soul. "I was nothing before you. I was invisible. You gave me back my life. If you go, I'll be blind in more ways than one. Please, fight. Fight for me the way you've always fought." The vet placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, his voice gentle. "All we can do is support him and hope his will is strong enough. Sometimes love makes the difference." Samuel clung to that fragile hope as they began treatment, administering medicine, fluids, and care. He never left the shepherd's side, sleeping in a chair beside the table, holding its paw through the long hours of the night. Neighbors visited, bringing food. Samuel barely touched their voices, full of sympathy. Some cried quietly at the sight of the proud animal brought low, others whispered encouragement, but all left with hearts heavy, knowing they had witnessed something sacred in the devotion between man and dog. Days blurred into each other as Samuel remained constant, whispering into the shepherd's ear about all the things they had yet to do, about the streets they had not walked, the children they had not inspired, the sunsets they would never see but could still feel together. He promised it a future, and slowly, miraculously, the shepherd responded. Its breathing steadied, its strength returned in faint increments, and though it would never again be the soldier it once was, it began to rise, to stand, to walk beside him again. When the vet finally told Samuel the dog had chosen to fight, Samuel wept harder than before this time, not in despair, but in gratitude. The weeks after the shepherd's collapse became a quiet season of healing for both man and dog, and Samuel devoted every ounce of his strength to ensuring his companion's recovery. Each morning he rose early, his hands finding the steady warmth of the shepherd curled beside his bed, and he gave thanks simply for the sound of its breathing, a sound he had once feared would vanish forever. The medicine helped restored some strength, but Samuel knew it was not medicine alone that carried the shepherd back from the edge. It was the will to stay the choice, to keep walking beside the man it had chosen as family. Their pace in the city became slower, their walks shorter, but those walks carried more meaning than any hurried step Samuel had ever taken. Each block they crossed together drew the eyes of neighbors, strangers, even tourists, people who had read or heard about the miracle of the blind black man and his German shepherd, who had defied abandonment, danger, and even death to hold on to one another. Reporters began to arrive, some politely knocking, others intruding their questions, fumbling to capture what words could barely describe. Samuel was hesitant, at first uncomfortable with the attention, but he soon realized that the story was no longer just about him. It was about the shepherd, about the lesson of devotion and redemption the dog carried on its scarred body and in its watchful eyes. He agreed to speak, but only if the shepherd sat beside him. With the dog's head resting on his knee, Samuel told the story of their first meeting on the sidewalk, of the bark that stopped traffic, of the cane returned by a gentle nudge, of the growl that defended him when no one else did, and of the subway stairs where the shepherd had clamped its teeth into his sleeve to save him from falling. He spoke of the night he thought he would lose the dog, how he clung to its paw and begged it not to leave, and how its faint wag of the tail had given him hope that love could be stronger than death. The world listened. The article was published in a local paper, first then picked up by larger outlets, and soon their story spread across the country, then across the ocean. Letters arrived from people Samuel had never met, veterans who said they cried when they saw the shepherd honored by a police officer, children who said they were no longer afraid of dogs, blind men and women who said they felt less alone, knowing Samuel walked with a guardian who had once been discarded like them. Donations poured in not for Samuel, but for organizations that rescued retired K9s and service dogs, a wave of compassion inspired by the simple truth that no life, not even that of an old dog, should be thrown away once its first purpose was fulfilled. Samuel received offers of technology, 2 high-tech canes GPS devices, even a robotic guide system designed to replace what the shepherd provided. But he refused each one with quiet dignity. "I already have the truest eyes beside me," he told them. "He doesn't just guide me across streets, he guides me through life." And when he said it, the shepherd pressed closer as though understanding. The city that had once overlooked Samuel now recognized him and greeted him with respect. Children ran up to pet the shepherd, parents told their kids the story of loyalty stronger than fear, and strangers stopped to thank Samuel for sharing a bond that had softened even the hardest hearts. The shepherd, though aged and slower, carried itself with a quiet pride, its tail swishing gently as though content with its place in the world at last. Samuel often sat on the park bench, with it remembering the day it had first laid its head on his knee, and he marveled at how that simple gesture had become the start of a story that changed not only his life, but touched countless others. One evening, as the sun sank and the city lights flickered on, Samuel leaned forward and whispered into the shepherd's ear, "You were never discarded. You were never useless. You were just waiting for me, and I was waiting for you." The shepherd sighed deeply, its body warm against his, and for the first time, Samuel felt not just protected, but truly whole. He knew time was finite, that one day the shepherd's watch would end, but he also knew that their bond had written something indelible into the hearts of those who had witnessed it. It was more than companionship, more than survival. It was proof that love, when freely given and fiercely held, could heal even the deepest scars. The story that began with a blind man falling alone on a sidewalk ended with the entire city, and then the world rising to see him, to see them both not as broken or forgotten, but as beacons of loyalty and hope. Samuel, once invisible, now walked in the light of a truth he would carry forever, that sometimes the most meaningful eyes are not the ones that see, but the ones that watch over you even when the world looks away. The end. Before we close this story, I'd love to hear from you. Did the loyalty of the shepherd touch you as much as it touched Samuel? If this journey moved you, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Share in the comments what part of this bond stayed with you most, and also, let us know where in the world you're watching from. We always love to see how far these stories reach.